The glass door of the shooting range swung open with a hollow creak, and heads turned almost instantly. She walked in carrying the kind of weapon that usually needed 2 men to handle comfortably. A Barrett .50 caliber rifle. Its matte black barrel caught the fluorescent light overhead, gleaming with quiet menace. It wasn't every day that someone walked into a suburban range with that beast of a gun. Most people here came with Glocks, AR-15s, or hunting rifles. A Barrett was overkill, military grade, heavy as sin, and loud enough to rattle nerves. And then there was the stranger carrying it. She wasn't what they expected. At first glance, she looked unassuming. Dressed in a worn leather jacket and faded jeans, her boots clacked softly against the polished floor. Her figure was lean, not frail, but certainly not built like someone you'd imagine hefting a .50 caliber rifle without assistance. The juxtaposition was enough to draw chuckles from the regulars clustered at the back benches. "Look at that," a man in a camo cap muttered, elbowing his buddy. "That thing's bigger than she is," his friend snorted. "She's not gonna fire it. Probably just taking pictures for Instagram." More laughter bubbled up, soft at first, then growing bolder as she carried the weapon past them. Some didn't even bother hiding their smirks. A woman with a Barrett was spectacle enough, but a woman like her, calm, quiet, and slender? To them, it was comedy waiting to unfold, but she didn't flinch. Her eyes remained focused on the far end of the range, scanning for an empty lane. They were sharp, dark eyes, the kind that seemed to measure everything, not missing a detail. Her movements betrayed no hesitation, no nervous fumble under the weight of curious stares. She walked with a certain rhythm, steady and deliberate, like someone who had done this countless times before. Still, the whispers followed her. "Bet. She can't even load it. She's gonna knock herself out with recoil. Should be entertaining." A pair of teenage boys near the vending machine stifled laughter as she passed. One of them whispered something too quiet to hear, but the grin that followed made it clear. They didn't expect her to last 5 minutes. She reached lane 12, unhurried. Setting the rifle case down with a soft thud, she unzipped it and revealed the full length of the Barrett. The chatter in the room dimmed slightly, curiosity edging out mockery. Even in this place, even among people who loved their firearms, the Barrett had a way of commanding respect. She slid the rifle onto the counter, the weight landing with authority. Slowly, methodically, she began laying out her gear: scope covers, ear protection, a small notebook, a pair of shooting gloves. Each movement was efficient, practiced, free of wasted motion. At the benches behind her, the laughter continued, though it had softened. "She looks serious," one man muttered. "Yeah, but wait till she pulls that trigger. That thing's gonna send her flying." They weren't entirely wrong. The Barrett was notorious for its punishing recoil. Without proper stance, even seasoned shooters could be knocked off balance. But she didn't seem troubled. She knelt beside the case, her expression unreadable, as though she had tuned out the entire world around her. From her jacket pocket, she pulled a small patch of cloth and set it beside the notebook. Nobody noticed it at first. It wasn't flashy, just another embroidered insignia. It would remain overlooked for now. At the far end of the range, targets hung beneath harsh white lights, rows of paper waiting for holes. The longest lane stretched nearly half a mile, farther than most here ever bothered shooting. Few had the patience, fewer had the skill. She studied the distance, her lips pressed into a thoughtful line. Then, with calm precision, she lifted the Barrett onto the stand. The weapon was massive in her hands, yet she moved with the ease of someone handling a trusted instrument. Behind her, the laughter had thinned. One of the older regulars leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "Watch her grip," he murmured to no one in particular. That's not a beginner's grip. But his comment was lost in the noise of a soda can popping open. Most of the crowd still expected failure. They wanted to see her flinch, to stumble, to be proven wrong for daring to bring such a weapon into their space. She didn't glance back at them. Her focus never wavered. She adjusted the bipod, locked it into place, and ran her hands along the rifle, checking every mechanism. It was ritual, almost ceremonial, the way she inspected each piece. Finally, she straightened, rolled her shoulders back, and tied her hair into a loose knot. The woman looked small compared to the weapon stretched out before her, but there was something in her stance that made the picture less ridiculous than the crowd wanted it to be. Something about the way her eyes narrowed, the way her breathing slowed, the way her hands moved without hesitation. It wasn't bravado. It was certainty. A new wave of whispers spread across the benches. Some were curious now, others skeptical, but all were watching. The woman didn't notice. Or maybe she did, but she simply didn't care. She lowered herself behind the rifle, cheek pressing lightly against the stock. Her finger hovered near the trigger, not trembling, not rushed. Around her, laughter grew quieter still, replaced by a silence that hummed with anticipation. The Barrett rested, massive and silent, waiting. And for the first time since she entered, the range seemed to hold its breath. She leaned lower over the massive Barrett, the muzzle pointed toward the far target. Her frame looked almost swallowed by the rifle, the weapon's sheer size dwarfing her body. To anyone who didn't know better, the image was absurd. A woman, half the weight of the gun itself, attempting to tame it. And the room noticed. The range had always been a place of background chatter, laughter, and the occasional boom of gunfire. But now it became a theater, and she was the unwilling actor. Under the spotlight, the gallery of regulars, seated at the benches behind the glass partition, had their eyes glued to lane 12. "Look at her," said the man in the camo cap, his voice a little louder now, emboldened by the company around him. "That rifle's a monster. Should never handle it." His buddy smirked, slouched back in his chair. "She's probably trying to impress someone. Bet she's one of those weekend shooters. Comes in once a year, takes a few pictures, then disappears." Their words drew laughter. It rippled across the group, feeding itself, gaining confidence in its cruelty. A younger man, barely out of his 20s, added, "Hope she's got a chiropractor on speed dial. That recoil's gonna snap her in half." The room chuckled again, and this time, even some of the quieter observers joined in, shaking their heads. For them, it wasn't about malice, but amusement. People came, here for entertainment as much as practice, and right now, she was the show. But not everyone was laughing. In the corner sat a retired Marine, his posture straight even as age bent his shoulders. He watched without speaking, his eyes narrowing with each movement she made. He saw what others didn't, the subtle economy in her actions, the way she touched the rifle with familiarity, the absence of nervous fidgeting. "She knows what she's doing," he muttered, mostly to himself. Nobody heard him. The woman's appearance was deceiving, and the crowd was trapped by it. She was slim, her face framed by dark hair that slipped loose from the knot she'd tied. She wasn't broad-shouldered or imposing. She looked like someone you might pass in a grocery store aisle without a second thought. And that ordinariness, contrasted against the massive Barrett, was precisely why the room couldn't take her seriously. One of the teenage boys from earlier leaned closer to the glass, cupping his hands around his mouth. "Hey, careful with that thing. Don't hurt yourself." The group erupted in another round of chuckles. Still, she didn't react. Her focus was absolute. She adjusted the scope, her fingers twisting the knobs with precision. She checked the bipod's stability, running her palm across the metal to ensure it was locked. She reached into her case for a single round, holding it up briefly before sliding it into the chamber. It was a ritual of discipline. To her, the laughter behind the glass may as well have been wind rustling through trees, present but irrelevant. Yet, inside the gallery, the jokes continued. She's taking. Forever. Like she's Googling how to shoot it in her head. Maybe she thinks slow motion makes it easier. Yeah, wait until it knocks her flat. That's when the fun starts. For many, it was sport. People laughed at what they didn't understand, and the sight of her, quiet and determined, only fueled their mockery. But beneath the humor, unease was beginning to stir. The old Marine noticed it first. "You see her stance?" he asked, this time addressing the man next to him. "She's not messing around. Most rookies, they don't even know where to start with a Barrett. But look at her grip. That's not trial and error. That's muscle memory." The man shrugged, unconvinced. "She's still gonna regret it. You'll see." But his words lacked conviction now. Back on the lane, she slipped on her gloves, tugging them snug around her fingers. She rolled her shoulders once, loosening tension, then leaned down again, cheek pressing against the stock. Her breathing slowed, steady, measured. It was a strange sight, the way she embodied such calm. There was no frantic checking, no trembling. No nervous glance at the crowd. She was stillness in a room filled with noise. And the noise began to falter. The teenagers, who had been snickering the loudest, quieted slightly. The man in the camo cap frowned, his smirk twitching. The gallery seemed caught between laughter and silence, unsure which way to lean. "Why is she so calm?" Someone muttered. "Because she doesn't know what's coming," another answered quickly, eager to cling to certainty. But doubt had been planted. The more they watched, the more cracks appeared in their confidence. They had expected fumbles, shaking hands, clumsy adjustments, obvious inexperience. Instead, they saw ritual. They saw patience. They saw someone who wasn't improvising, but executing a routine practiced many times before. The Marine leaned forward, voice firmer now. "Mark my words. She's done this before." Still, nobody wanted to believe it. Not yet. The woman reached for the small notebook beside her. She opened it briefly, scanning a page filled with scribbled numbers, wind speeds, distances, adjustments. Notes only a serious shooter would keep. She closed it, set it back down, and returned her eye to the scope. Her finger brushed the trigger, not pulling, just feeling its weight. Her lips pressed into a thin line. Her body stilled, as if the air itself had paused around her. And then, for the first time since she walked in, the laughter stopped entirely. It wasn't respect yet. It wasn't belief. But it was attention. Raw, focused, uneasy attention. In that moment, the crowd realized something they hadn't before. She wasn't here to entertain them. She wasn't here for show. She was here for the rifle, for the target, for something that had nothing to do with them. The gallery shifted uncomfortably, the weight of their earlier jokes settling in. Some still clung to doubt, but their voices had quieted. Others leaned forward, unable to look away. And behind the glass, the woman carried on, silent, precise, immovable. The Barrett lay ready. A target waited in the distance. The room held its breath. She knelt behind the Barrett, the massive rifle resting on its bipod with perfect balance. Every line of her body spoke of deliberate control. Shoulders squared, chin lowered, eye pressed to the scope. The soft hum of fluorescent lights above blended with the distant chatter of the range, though the sound seemed distant to her. Her world had narrowed to the target in the distance, a pale rectangle of paper half a mile away, and the rifle she had carried with unwavering confidence. Around her, the room had begun to shift in tone. The laughter that had greeted her entrance had faded, replaced by quiet murmurs of curiosity and disbelief. A few of the veterans who had scoffed now leaned forward, fingers drumming on the benches, eyes fixed on her movements. Even the teenagers, once bold and mocking, held their breaths, unsure whether to giggle or stay silent. She exhaled slowly, feeling the rifle settle against her shoulder. The Barrett was alive beneath her hands, a beast coiled and ready. She adjusted the scope, focusing on the faint dot of her distant target. Every number in her notebook had prepared her for this moment. Wind speed, bullet drop, humidity, distance. Every calculation was meticulous, nothing left to chance. She was not just aiming. She was predicting the bullet's path, bending physics to her will. Her finger hovered just above the trigger, the slightest pressure enough to send the projectile hurtling forward. A few spectators whispered to each other, their disbelief now tinged with caution. She might actually... One began, but trailed off. They had expected failure. The calm certainty she exuded was uncharted territory. The older Marine watched. With a nod, his eyes narrowing. "Steady," he muttered under his breath, almost as if offering advice to her from across the room. He knew what it took to handle a weapon like this. He could see the precision in her stance, the subtle micro-adjustments in her posture. She wasn't a beginner. She was a master at work. Time slowed for her. The world beyond the rifle faded. The fluorescent lights, the chatter, the expectant eyes, everything dissolved. Only the target and the rifle remained. Her breathing was controlled, steady, a rhythm honed over countless sessions of preparation and practice. Then, with a deliberate exhale, she squeezed the trigger. The sound erupted like thunder in the awe. Room. The massive recoil jolted her shoulder, but her body absorbed it with practiced grace. There was no flinch, no stumble, only the perfect execution of movement she had rehearsed so many times before. The target, nearly half a mile away, trembled in anticipation. Then a clean hole appeared, dead center. The gallery gasped. A hush fell over the room, broken only by the echoes of the shot lingering in the air. The teenagers' mouths dropped. The man in the camo cap froze mid-gesture, and even those who had doubted her skill could not look away. What they had expected, chaos, fumbling, disaster, had not happened. Instead, a single precise strike cut through doubt like a knife. She allowed herself a brief nod to acknowledge the shot, though no one was watching her reaction. The rifle was reloaded with fluid, practiced movements, not hurried, not showy, just perfect. Another shot followed. The sound repeated, as thunderous, and authoritative as the first, yet controlled, measured. And again, the bullet landed exactly where she intended. Center mass, clean and undeniable. Now disbelief was replaced by something else, uneasy respect. The laughter that had once filled the room had vanished entirely. Observers leaned forward, drawn into a mixture of awe and incredulity. Every movement of hers challenged the assumptions they had made upon seeing her enter the range. "By God," whispered one of the older shooters, his voice barely audible. She's good." Her calm never wavered. Each shot was a statement of skill, a quiet proclamation that mastery requires patience and discipline, not noise or theatrics. The rifle, once an object of intimidation and spectacle, had become an extension of her, a tool through which her focus and expertise manifested. The teenage boys who had once snickered were now frozen, eyes wide. One of them whispered, I didn't think," before trailing off, leaving the sentence unfinished because no words could capture the reality they were witnessing. She paused after the third round, adjusting her aim slightly. The target was distant, yet her eyes found it with uncanny accuracy. She had measured the distance and factored in environmental conditions, but even that wouldn't have mattered. Without the practiced control in her hands, the weapon obeyed her, as though it had been built to answer only to someone like her. The older Marine leaned back slightly, shaking his head in quiet admiration. "That's no ordinary shooter," he muttered. "She's exceptional." Some in the gallery began murmuring among themselves. "Who is she?" one asked. "How long has she been training?" Others whispered numbers and distances they couldn't believe she could manage, each speculation growing more incredulous as she continued to demonstrate flawless execution. And still, she did not look up. She did not seek approval or validation. Her focus remained absolute, her movements precise, her breathing calm. The rifle was an instrument of her discipline, the target a silent companion, and the room around her an audience she neither needed nor feared. A fourth shot thundered across the range, the recoil jarring her once again, yet she absorbed it perfectly. Another hole appeared in the target, impossibly perfect, consistent, undeniable. The spectators could no longer deny it. The woman they had laughed at moments ago was not a novice. She was a professional, a master, a force they had underestimated entirely. One of the men whispered to his friend, his voice hushed, almost reverent. She's world class." The words spread quietly, a chain reaction of realization. A few people in the back murmured the same thing. Others simply nodded in stunned acknowledgement. Even the teenagers who had mocked her were leaning forward, captivated, unable to look away. The spectacle they had expected, embarrassment, had been replaced by something entirely different. Awe. And yet, she remained unmoved. No smile, no grand gesture, no flourish. Just the steady rhythm of preparation, aim, and release. Each shot was deliberate, calculated, flawless. Finally, she paused. The room exhaled collectively. The tension broke. Not in laughter, but in stunned silence. The impossible had happened. She had taken control of the Barrett, tamed it, and proven her mastery in a matter of seconds. The man in the camo cap rubbed his eyes, muttering under his breath, I can't believe it." She reloaded one last time, checking her scope and the distance to the target. Her calm remained unbroken. She had not needed to perform for them, but the impact of her skill could not be ignored. The room had shifted. Where once there had been ridicule, now there was respect. Where once there had been doubt, now there was acknowledgement, silent but real. She took a final aim, holding the rifle steady, her finger poised above the trigger. The gallery leaned forward instinctively, drawn by a mixture of tension, curiosity, and awe. She exhaled slowly, pressed the trigger, and another shot rang out, punctuating the moment with undeniable proof. The target now bore the marks of her precision, 4 perfect holes, each an unspoken declaration that skill, focus, and discipline could overcome expectation, prejudice, and doubt. And for the first time since she entered the range, the crowd began to see her differently. The woman they had laughed at, the one they had expected to fail spectacularly, had become someone extraordinary. She lowered the rifle, not triumphantly, not with flourish, but quiet satisfaction. The room remained silent, the echoes of gunfire fading, replaced by the unspoken acknowledgement of her mastery. She had spoken with bullets. They had listened. The echoes of her last shot hung in the room like a tangible presence. The Barrett lay momentarily quiet on its bipod, a heavy beast finally at rest. The gallery, once filled with laughter and mockery, now felt oddly muted, as if the sound itself had been replaced by a collective sense of disbelief. Some of the spectators blinked rapidly, trying to reconcile what they had just witnessed with what they had expected. She actually did it," whispered one of the men in the back. His voice trembled with a mixture of astonishment and fear of being judged for believing it. "I didn't think anyone could." I mean, he shook his head, unable to complete the thought. A few others leaned closer to the glass partition, silently acknowledging that what they had assumed about her weakness, inexperience, foolishness, was utterly wrong. The older Marine from the corner leaned forward, resting his hands on his knees. "Watch her," he said, his voice low but commanding. "It's not luck. That stance, that grip, the control. She's done this before, many times." The words were met with muted skepticism. After all, experience didn't make someone appear so small, so ordinary, yet handle a .50 caliber rifle with such absolute control. It seemed impossible, almost inconceivable. Meanwhile, she continued her ritual, methodical and unhurried. Her gloves flexed slightly as she adjusted her grip, then ran her fingers along the stock, checking for any imperfection. Every action was precise, intentional. The rifle seemed to hum under her hands, alive with controlled power. The teenagers who had been snickering moments ago shifted uncomfortably. One whispered to the other, "Do you think she's some kind of pro?" His friend shrugged, unable to respond. There was no precedent for what they were seeing. She wasn't performing tricks or showing off. She wasn't even acknowledging the audience. She was simply in her element, moving through a routine that others could only attempt to understand. At the far end of the range, the targets remained pristine, except for the holes she had already made, perfect, centered, consistent. The sight of them sent a ripple of quiet tension through the room. Every onlooker knew that hitting even one of those targets at this distance was extraordinary. Hitting several consecutively was extraordinary beyond imagination. The man in the camo cap who had mocked her earlier rubbed his eyes and muttered under his breath, I can't believe this." His tone was a mix of awe and reluctant admiration. He had come expecting comedy, but instead he had witnessed mastery. "She's unreal," another whispered, shaking his head. "No way that's human. No one can do that." The room's mood had shifted. Where once there was noise and casual amusement, now there was stillness filled with unspoken respect. Even those who had been quietly skeptical now leaned forward, captivated by the precision, the calm, the control. She didn't rush. She didn't show signs of stress or excitement. She checked her scope again, adjusting it with delicate precision, her movements almost ritualistic. Her eyes scanned the far target, calculating, considering. Then, without a word, she adjusted the bipod, subtly shifting her stance to compensate for a minor breeze that hadn't been noticeable to anyone else. The range felt smaller now, more intimate, as if her focus had compressed the space around her. Each movement was a statement of confidence, an unspoken declaration that she was not here for validation, only to execute her craft. From the back, a man whispered, "Look at her hands. They don't even shake. Not a twitch. Not a flinch. That's insane." Another nodded, his jaw tight. "I've handled rifles all my life. She's not just good. She's beyond good." A wave of quiet. Awe rippled through the spectators. Some leaned against the glass, gripping the edge nervously. Others simply stared, unsure of how to process what they were seeing. Every second she remained calm and collected reinforced their astonishment. The young boy who had whispered first now looked at his friend wide-eyed. Do you think she could break a world record?" His friend swallowed, eyes still locked on her. I don't know. But if she's not already, she should be." The Marine nodded silently, observing the scene with careful calculation. He could see subtle indicators that others had missed. The way she adjusted the scope, the way she aligned her shoulders, the micro-adjustments in her finger pressure. These were the signs of someone who had spent years mastering the art. Someone who had practiced under conditions far more challenging than this suburban range could ever replicate. The murmurs continued, quieter now, shifting in tone from doubt to wonder. A few people exchanged glances, silently acknowledging that their assumptions had been entirely wrong. The laughter, once so loud and confident, had evaporated completely, replaced by a respectful, almost reverent attention. She paused for a moment, standing behind the rifle and looking down the sight line to the distant target. Her eyes were calm, focused, unblinking. Even in this moment of silent tension, she radiated a sense of complete control. Then she knelt again, adjusting the rifle slightly, and prepared for her next shot. The anticipation in the room was palpable. Every person in the gallery understood, without needing words, that what they were witnessing was rare, something exceptional, something almost beyond comprehension. A few whispered guesses started to circulate. "She must have trained in the military," one said. "No, she's probably a competitive shooter," another countered. But even the experts among them knew that what she was doing required more than experience alone. It demanded a level of precision, focus, and discipline that few could ever achieve. Her finger hovered just above the trigger. Every movement was controlled, every breath deliberate. She was not hurrying, not showing off, not performing. She was executing a sequence of actions that had been honed through countless hours of preparation. The Barrett was no longer a weapon of intimidation. It was an instrument of mastery. The room held its collective breath, even the most cynical. Observers had been silenced by the display. The tension was thick, almost tangible, as the next shot approached. And in that silence, one truth became undeniable. The woman they had laughed at, the one they had expected to stumble and fail, was in a league far above them. She was not here for their amusement. She was here to demonstrate skill, focus, and absolute command over her craft. The rifle, massive and unyielding, waited like a patient predator. And so did the crowd, now fully awake to the reality before them. The preparation was complete. The target awaited. The room seemed suspended in a moment that stretched beyond time, filled with anticipation, awe, and unspoken respect. And though she did not yet reveal it, a small patch on her arm hinted at the truth, a truth that would soon silence the room entirely. For now, she remained calm, her hands steady, her eyes unwavering. Every person in the gallery knew, in that moment, that something extraordinary was unfolding before them. The Barrett was ready. She was ready. And the world, even in that small suburban shooting range, was about to take notice. She exhaled slowly and refocused. The Barrett rested solidly beneath her, heavy yet responsive under her practiced grip. Her finger hovered above the trigger, and she felt the subtle pull of the stock against her shoulder. Every shot so far had been deliberate, precise, and flawless, but the next sequence would test the room's patience, and their assumptions even further. She adjusted the bipod slightly, aligning it with the faintest drift in the air currents. A breeze, imperceptible to most, brushed the paper targets half a mile away. To her, it mattered. Every environmental nuance mattered. The first shot in this sequence tore through the air. Thunderous, precise, devastatingly controlled. The recoil jolted her shoulder, but she absorbed it seamlessly, returning the rifle to its previous position, as if it were a natural extension of her body. Another hole appeared, perfectly centered. The room gasped collectively. Those who had once laughed now leaned forward, eyes wide and mouths slightly agape. The teenagers had gone completely silent. Even the camo-capped man, who had mocked her from the beginning, shook his head in disbelief. She's doing it again," whispered one of the regulars, barely audible over the echoing shots. And she did. One after another, the bullets tore into the targets, leaving a series of impossibly perfect holes. Center mass every time, the consistency almost surreal. Each shot was a quiet statement, a display of unparalleled skill, and a testament to the hours of preparation behind her calm demeanor. The crowd could barely comprehend it. People murmured to each other, repeating phrases like, "That's impossible," and "How is she doing that?" But no one dared speak too loudly. The room was filled with an awkward mixture of fear, admiration, and disbelief. The older Marine leaned back, eyes narrowing. "That's no amateur," he said to no one in particular. "She's beyond that. That's world-class shooting, and she's not even flinching. Every shot perfect. Every shot." The camel-capped man muttered under his breath, his voice tinged with awe. "I've handled rifles all my life. That level of control, I've never seen anything like it." The teenager whispered to his friend, voice trembling, Do you think she's breaking records or something?" His friend simply shook his head, unable to find words. She paused briefly after the fourth shot, scanning the distant target. The holes were all perfectly aligned, the grouping impeccable. Even the most skeptical in the room had to acknowledge that this was not chance. Precision like this was not learned overnight. It was honed over years, years that most of the gallery could not even imagine. Without looking, she adjusted her scope, making minute changes that would be imperceptible to anyone else. She was meticulous, almost surgical, in her movements. Her hands did not shake, her eyes did not waver, and her breathing remained steady, rhythmic, and unbroken. The Barrett was a partner, not a burden, and together they executed perfect marksmanship. The gallery shifted uneasily. No one spoke, though everyone was watching. The tension was palpable. Every shot she took reinforced the reality they had been struggling to accept. The woman they had mocked was extraordinary. "She's not human," one of the older shooters whispered to his companion. "No one can do that consistently. It's impossible." The Marine nodded slightly, though he already knew better. "She's trained for this. You don't get this good by accident. That's talent, yes, but more importantly, that's discipline. She's mastered it, and the discipline showed." With each new shot, the crowd's disbelief deepened, transforming into something else, silent, reverent awe. The weight of her achievement settled over them like a tangible force. They had mocked her mere moments ago, expecting failure. Now, they were witnesses to something beyond their comprehension. Another shot rang out, louder than the previous, reverberating across the room. A perfect strike. Another followed, equally flawless. And another. One by one, the bullets tore into the distant paper, leaving a pattern of precise destruction. Center mass, repeated, without deviation. The gallery could no longer deny it. Each impact erased doubt, replacing it with a realization that they were in the presence of someone truly exceptional. The woman who had walked in carrying the massive Barrett, who had appeared ordinary and unassuming, was far beyond ordinary now. Even the youngest observers sensed the gravity of the moment. The teenagers leaned closer to the glass, faces pale, barely breathing. Their previous arrogance, their whispered jokes, had vanished completely. In their place was a growing, unspoken respect, mixed with disbelief. One of the older shooters whispered, "I've never seen anyone shoot like that, not even in competitions. That's unreal." And she continued, unhurried, unshaken. She reloaded with precision, checked the alignment of the bipod, scanned the scope, and fired again. Each shot followed the last with flawless timing. The room felt suspended, every person in it caught between admiration and the lingering echo of the rifle. The camo-capped man shook his head, muttering, I can't believe what I'm seeing. That's perfect. Every shot perfect." The Marine nodded knowingly, almost to himself. "That's why she's here. That's why she's any good. At all. Consistency, control, and focus. Everything else is noise, and the crowd could feel it. Everything else had become noise. The world outside the laying, the laughter, the whispers, the assumptions, had faded. Only the woman, the rifle, and the target mattered. A young woman in the back, who had been quietly observing, whispered, "Do you think she's a world record holder?" Some of the older men exchanged glances, uncertain how to respond. The answer seemed obvious, yet they hesitated. Who could achieve such flawless accuracy under pressure? Who could maintain such calm and poise while wielding a weapon of that magnitude? The answer was standing right there, behind the Barrett, expression serene, hands steady, eyes focused. She fired another round, each impact another affirmation of her mastery. The sounds of the bullets echoed through the range, but the audience could hardly hear them over the thundering realization that they had misjudged her. Each strike left the target more riddled with perfect holes. Each hole was a testament to her discipline, her skill, and her unmatched precision. She was not performing for them. She did not need their acknowledgement. She was executing her craft, a craft honed to perfection. The whispers among the gallery grew quieter, subdued by awe. Even those who had mocked her found themselves unable to speak, mouths slightly agape, eyes wide. They were witnesses to something extraordinary, something they had assumed impossible. She paused once more, allowing herself a brief breath. The rifle remained steady, the bipod anchored, the scope perfectly aligned. She looked at the distant target with the same calm focus she had carried throughout, unshaken by the eyes watching her every move. It was a silent declaration. Precision was power, and control was mastery. She had spoken without words. The room had listened, utterly captivated. And in that moment, the truth began to sink in. The woman who had walked in carrying a rifle larger than herself, the woman who had inspired whispers and mockery, was no ordinary shooter. She was exceptional. And they were witnessing the beginning of something historic. The barrel of the Barrett still rested solidly on the bipod, silent for only a heartbeat before she began again. Her breathing remained steady, her movements deliberate. Every slight adjustment she made was calculated, a testament to hours, months, and years of practice. The rifle was no longer a foreign object. It was an extension of her body, responsive to the slightest shift in weight, the tiniest micro-correction in aim. The gallery was silent. The earlier whispers and chuckles completely evaporated. Eyes were wide, mouths slightly agape, confor. The first time, everyone realized they were no longer spectators of a novice. They were witnessing an expert at the peak of her discipline. She's incredible," whispered a man in the back, barely audible over the faint hum of the fluorescent lights. His voice trembled with a mix of astonishment and disbelief. I've never seen anyone shoot like that." The older Marine, who had been watching with a knowing eye since the first shot, leaned forward slightly, his fingers gripping his knees. "That's not luck," he murmured to himself. "That's precision. That's control. That's mastery. And she's not even breaking a sweat." Even the teenagers, who had arrived expecting entertainment, were frozen in stunned attention. They could no longer make fun of her. Their earlier arrogance had been stripped away by the sheer reality of her skill. Every shot she fired obliterated the assumptions they had carried, leaving only awe in its place. The first bullet of this sequence tore through the air, loud and commanding. It impacted the distant target with mechanical perfection, sending a faint tremor through the paper. Her shoulder absorbed recoil effortlessly, and without hesitation, she returned the rifle to the same position as before, finger poised for the next shot. Another bullet tore through the target, followed by a third, then a fourth. Each one landed dead center, each one executed with unerring accuracy. The gallery could no longer breathe comfortably. Every strike reinforced the reality that she was more than exceptional. She was untouchable in this moment. She's done it again, whispered the camo-capped man. His previous bravado had disappeared entirely, replaced by stunned reverence. I can't believe it. The Marine shook his head slightly, lips pressed into a thin line. Consistency like that is rare, he said quietly. Most shooters can hit once or twice, maybe 3 times under perfect conditions. She's doing it over and over. No flinch, no error. That's elite. That's record level. The whispers spread through the crowd. Record level? One man muttered. You think she's done this before on a big stage? Nobody answered immediately. But even without confirmation, the idea took root. The combination of flawless execution, calm composure, and unmatched consistency hinted at experience far beyond this small range. She paused for just a moment, scanning the distance and checking her scope. Her movements were fluid, deliberate, and unhurried. The slight breeze that had begun to drift through the range was accounted for in her adjustments. To the untrained, it appeared effortless. To the trained, it was genius. Another shot cracked across the air. The impact was so precise, so centered, that the paper quivered almost theatrically. A 5th strike followed, then a 6th, each one reinforcing the image of a shooter who had conquered both the rifle and the distance. The room had shifted entirely. Laughter was gone, replaced by a heavy silence charged with awe. Spectators leaned forward, their initial judgment replaced by admiration. The teenagers whispered excitedly, their voices tinged with disbelief. She's unbelievable, one said. I've never seen anyone like her. Even the veterans, accustomed to precision shooting, found themselves unable to look away. They had seen skill, but what they were witnessing now transcended the ordinary. Every shot told a story of discipline, of control, of preparation. A narrative they could not ignore. The woman remained composed, her eyes locked on the distant target. Every movement was economical and precise, her body absorbing the rifle's massive recoil with practiced ease. She was a study in calm perfection, an image of focus that seemed almost otherworldly. The Marine, watching closely, whispered to himself, "That patch on her arm, I think I know what it means. She's not just good, she's the best, the absolute best." But no one else had noticed yet. The insignia remained hidden, a subtle clue that had yet to reveal her full status. For now, the room was left with only her performance, a series of perfect, disciplined shots that left no room for argument or doubt. The next round of bullets tore through the air with rhythmic precision. Each impact echoed through the gallery, creating a cadence that mesmerized the audience. The force of the recoil, absorbed seamlessly by her lean frame, was almost hypnotic to watch. It was as if she and the rifle were one entity, moving together in a synchronized dance of power and control. The camo-capped man whispered again, incredulously, "She's untouchable. Every shot perfect." The Marine nodded subtly, eyes still narrowing. "That's not arrogance. That's mastery. She's done this so many times that the mechanics are second nature. That's why she's calm. That's why she's flawless." The teenagers, now fully captivated, whispered to each other, trying to quantify what they were seeing. "Do you think she's set records before?" one asked. His companion shook, his head unable to answer. Words seemed inadequate to describe the performance unfolding before them. The sheer precision, combined with calm composure and repeated consistency, defied ordinary comprehension. She paused once more, lifting the rifle slightly, scanning the target, checking her scope. The room's silence was almost sacred. The gallery had become more than spectators. They were witnesses to something rare, almost legendary in its display. Another shot cracked through the air, precise, controlled, perfect. And another. The series of bullets created a pattern that was not random, but deliberate, artistic, and precise. The room collectively exhaled in awe. No one laughed anymore. No one whispered jokes. Every person in the gallery understood, at some level, that they were witnessing a shooter who had transcended ordinary skill. They were in the presence of someone extraordinary. Her finger hovered, her breathing controlled, her eyes unwavering. Each shot reinforced a truth the room was only beginning to grasp. She was not here for validation. She was here to execute perfection. And with each impact on the distant paper, the quiet realization spread. She was not merely skilled. She was exceptional, disciplined, and unmatched in her craft. She had transformed the room's energy from disbelief to respect, and from respect to awe. The woman who had entered the range carrying the Barrett, once the subject of laughter and ridicule, was now the focal point of silent admiration. The spectators had witnessed her mastery unfold in real time, each shot a lesson in precision, focus, and control. And as she paused once more, the room exhaled collectively, not out of relief, but out of the weight of witnessing something extraordinary. The whispers had begun again, quieter this time, tinged with reverence. "She's historic," one muttered. The teenagers, wide-eyed, nodded. "Yeah, she's not just good, she's unbelievable." The Marine watched silently, a faint smile forming. "Not just good," he murmured, "the best. Absolute best." And in that moment, the room understood. They were in the presence of mastery. The room had grown impossibly quiet. Every person in the gallery was leaning forward, eyes locked on lane 12, mouths slightly parted, hearts racing. She had fired shot after flawless shot, her precision untouched by the weight of expectation, or the magnitude of the distance. The Barrett rested in her hands, as if it were part of her, the weapon's immense recoil absorbed without falter. And yet, something changed as she reloaded for the next round. She bent slightly, her sleeves riding up her forearms as she adjusted her gloves. For a fraction of a second, a small patch became visible on her upper arm. It was subtle, embroidered, almost unassuming, yet its presence immediately drew the attention of those watching. The patch bore insignia they recognized, even if only vaguely. The emblem of a world record-holding marksman, a symbol reserved for the elite few who had surpassed human limits in long-distance shooting. Some of the spectators gasped softly, whispering to each other, trying to make sense of what they were seeing. The man in the camo cap leaned forward, squinting at the patch. His disbelief was palpable. "Wait, is that?" His voice trailed off, and he swallowed hard. The Marine in the corner, however, didn't need to guess. His eyes narrowed, jaw tightening. "That's it," he murmured. "That's why she's so perfect. That patch isn't decoration. It's history, records, mastery, the best of the best." A ripple passed through the gallery. Those who had doubted her from the start, those who had laughed at her small frame and calm demeanor, suddenly felt the weight of their assumptions crash down upon them. They had mocked a world record holder without realizing it. She didn't notice, or perhaps didn't care. Her focus remained absolute. The targets in the distance were her only concern, and the rifle in her hands was an extension of her will. She had practiced this moment countless times, but never for applause or recognition. Every shot was a dialogue between skill and machine, precision and patience. The first shot, after the patch revealed itself, tore through the air. The impact echoed with a deafening clarity, sending a precise, perfect hole through the distant paper. Another followed, then another, each bullet landing exactly where it should, grouped with terrifying consistency. The room remained silent, save for the distant reverberations of her rifle. The gallery could barely comprehend it. The teenagers had forgotten their phones, forgotten to whisper, forgotten to move. The camel-capped man's eyes were wide, disbelief etched into every line of his face. Even seasoned shooters, veterans, and those who thought they had seen it all, leaned forward, unable to tear their eyes away. "She's unreal," whispered one of the older men, voice barely audible. That patch means she's broken every record. She's history." The realization sank in slowly, like a stone dropped into water. Every shot they had witnessed, every precise strike, was no accident. It was not luck. It was not beginner's luck or a fluke. It was the result of years of discipline, training, and unparalleled focus. The patch confirmed it. She was more than extraordinary. She was the pinnacle of human skill. And she didn't need their acknowledgement. She reloaded again, hands moving. With the same unhurried precision, checking her scope, adjusting her bipod for the faintest environmental drift. She exhaled slowly, and her eyes narrowed slightly as she aligned the rifle with the distant target. The next shot ripped through the range. Thundered, perfect. A fourth, a fifth, a sixth, each impact clean, centered, and deliberate. The crowd's earlier awe had now shifted into complete reverence, a quiet recognition that they were witnessing someone beyond ordinary comprehension. Even the teenagers, who had once mocked her entrance, whispered to each other, voices trembling, "Do you think she's really the best in the world?" one asked. His friend nodded, eyes wide. "She has to be. Look at her. That patch. The way she moves, every shot perfect. She's not human." The older Marine leaned back slightly, hands clasped. "It's not luck," he murmured. "That patch, that emblem. It's history in her hands. She's done this countless times under conditions far more extreme than this range." What they're seeing is mastery refined to the point of perfection. A hush fell over the entire room. The spectators no longer whispered. They watched, captivated, as she continued. Another shot cracked through the air, followed by another. And another. Every bullet found its mark. Every shot confirmed her skill. Every hole in the target told a story of precision, patience, and unparalleled expertise. The man in the camo cap finally spoke, his voice low, almost reverent. I can't believe it. That patch, she's the world record holder. And she's showing us exactly why." The teenagers exchanged stunned looks. Their earlier bravado had vanished entirely, replaced with awe and disbelief. They had come expecting comedy, entertainment, maybe a spectacle of failure. Instead, they were witnessing history. And she remained unshaken, calm, focused, absolute. Each movement was deliberate, each breath measured. The rifle, massive and punishing, obeyed her with the ease of a trained partner. The Marine observed quietly, his mind cataloging every movement, every micro-adjustment. He could see the subtle techniques invisible to the untrained eye, how her shoulder absorbed recoil, how her grip maintained perfect alignment, how her stance minimized vibration, how her breathing sensed with the trigger. Every shot was a masterclass in control. The crowd could sense it, even if they could not analyze it. Every strike was an affirmation. Every shot a demonstration of skill that bordered on the impossible. She paused briefly, reloading yet again, and allowed herself a small glance at the gallery. Her face remained calm, expression serene. There was no arrogance, no showmanship, no demand for recognition. She did not need it. Her skill spoke louder than any words ever could. The patch glimmered subtly under the fluorescent lights. For those who noticed it, it was confirmation of everything they had begun to suspect, that she was unmatched, the best in the world, a living legend in her field. The room held its collective breath as she fired again, each bullet tearing through the distance with unwavering precision. Every shot landed perfectly. Every impact was met with silent astonishment. Some spectators' jaws had dropped completely. Others simply leaned closer, unable to tear their eyes away. The realization that they were witnessing someone at the pinnacle of human capability had fully settled in. She's history, one of the older men whispered again, voice almost trembling. Yes, said another quietly. And we're watching it unfold in real time. The room was no longer a gallery of casual shooters. It had transformed into a shrine of awe. Every person present was now fully aware that they were witnessing mastery, something rare, almost sacred. The weight of the moment pressed down on everyone like a tangible force, a shared understanding of what true skill could look like. She fired again, smoothly, each shot perfectly spaced, perfectly aligned. The target now bore the marks of her repeated precision, holes so consistent and centered that it was almost impossible to believe. The echoes reverberated in the gallery, but the audience barely noticed. Their minds were occupied by the realization that the woman they had mocked was a world record-holding marksman executing perfection before their eyes. She paused once more, fingers resting lightly on the trigger, eyes scanning the far target. Calm, focused, absolute. The patch on her arm gleamed subtly in the light, silent proof of the heights she had achieved. The room, filled with people who had doubted her mere moments ago, had been transformed by what they had seen. The laughter, the mockery, the assumptions, all gone. What remained was reverence, awe, and a quiet understanding of the exceptional. She had carried the Barrett into the room with quiet strength, had fired with flawless precision, and had revealed her status without fanfare. She had spoken through her skill. The room had listened. And now, every eye in the gallery was focused not on the rifle, not on the targets, but on the woman herself, a master, a world record holder, a living testament to the power of discipline, focus, and unwavering dedication. The final shot rang through the range, crisp and definitive. The Barrett rested heavy yet balanced on its bipod, silent now, as though satisfied with the display it had just helped orchestrate. The targets, half a mile away, were perforated with a near-perfect series of holes, an undeniable testament to the woman behind the trigger. The gallery remained frozen, suspended in a quiet awe that seemed to stretch the air itself. For a few seconds, nobody moved. The teenagers who had once mocked her leaned forward, mouths open, eyes wide. Even their whispered jokes, their bravado, had disappeared entirely. They were witnesses now to something they could barely comprehend, an unprecedented display of focus, skill, and discipline. The man in the camo cap, who had been the loudest skeptic earlier, simply rubbed his eyes, unable to form words. He shook his head slowly, as if the reality he had just observed had surpassed his understanding. I can't believe it, he whispered, voice barely audible. The older Marine, sitting quietly in the corner, observed with a faint, knowing smile. His eyes lingered on her hands, on the rifle, on her posture. She's mastered everything, he said softly. Every shot, every adjustment, every micro-movement. Flawless. That patch isn't just decoration. It's history. She's earned it. The patch on her arm glimmered subtly in the fluorescent light, small, understated, yet infinitely significant. It identified her not just as a shooter, but as the best in the world, a world record holder. The gallery had only just realized what they had been witnessing, proof that she had reached heights most could only dream of. Despite the recognition and awe surrounding her, she remained calm. There was no flare of triumph, no arrogant grin, no demand for applause. Her expression was serene, focused, almost meditative. She had come to the range not to prove herself, not to seek validation, but to execute her craft perfectly, without distraction. And now, she allowed herself a brief moment to breathe. Her shoulders relaxed slightly, her fingers easing off the trigger. The recoil had left its familiar mark on her shoulder, but she had absorbed it as if it were nothing more than a fleeting weight. She lowered her gaze to the target line, scanning the distant paper, appreciating the result of her discipline and years of practice. The audience, meanwhile, was beginning to process the full magnitude of what they had just seen. Murmurs arose, soft but growing, each voice filled with a mixture of respect, astonishment, and newfound humility. "She's incredible," whispered a veteran, still gripping the edge of the bench. "I've been around shooters all my life. I've seen competitions, records, but nothing like that. Nothing." The Marine nodded slightly. "It's rare to see talent and discipline converge like this," he said. "Most people have one or the other. She has both, refined, honed, and executed perfectly. That's why she's standing where she is." Some of the younger observers, previously brash and confident, were now silent, unable to reconcile the woman they had mocked with the master they had witnessed. The girl who had seemed small and ordinary, who had carried the massive Barrett as if it were absurd for someone of her size, was now a figure of awe and inspiration. She's a record holder," one whispered, almost in disbelief. "I can't believe we doubted her." Others nodded, faces pale but respectful. The gallery had transformed from a place of casual observation to a space of quiet reverence. Every person present had been touched, if only indirectly, by the display of mastery they had just witnessed. She allowed herself a small, subtle nod toward the distant target, almost as a private acknowledgement of her work. No one else saw it, perhaps, or perhaps they did, and it registered in the quiet corners of their minds that even in achieving greatness, she carried humility alongside skill. The Marine stood slowly, moving closer to the glass, his eyes never leaving her. "Not just skill," he murmured. "Patience, discipline, focus. She's taught everyone here a lesson in what it truly means to master your craft." The sound of her breathing was almost meditative, calm, steady. She removed her gloves carefully, placing them beside the Barrett, and straightened slightly. The weapon, heavy and powerful, now seemed almost ceremonial, an instrument that had carried her. Message of precision and control. Some of the gallery members finally found their voices, murmuring among themselves in awe. "Did you see that grouping?" one asked. "Perfect every time. How is that possible?" "I don't know," another replied. "It's not just skill. It's focus, years of training, discipline, a level none of us will ever reach." The realization settled in fully. This was more than a display of marksmanship. It was a demonstration of human potential, an exhibition of dedication and mastery at the highest possible level. She stepped back from the rifle, her movements fluid, almost casual, though nothing about her performance had been casual. Every shot had been deliberate, every micro-adjustment precise. She looked at the patch on her arm briefly, a reminder of the records she held and the standards she had set for herself. Standards that far exceeded anything the audience had ever imagined. The camo-capped man finally muttered aloud, voice trembling slightly. She's the best in the world. Right here. Right now. The teenagers, pale and wide-eyed, whispered in awe. "I can't believe we mocked her," one said. "We were so wrong." She remained quiet, her eyes scanning the distant target one last time. Every hole, every strike, every measured impact was a testament not only to her skill, but to the countless hours of discipline, practice, and patience that had brought her to this moment. She had carried the Barrett not to intimidate, not to prove, but to execute her craft perfectly, and the gallery had witnessed history unfold. The Marine clapped slowly, quietly, more to himself than to anyone else. "Perfect execution," he said. "Every shot, every adjustment. Flawless. That's what mastery looks like. That's what a world record holder looks like." Others in the gallery finally began to applaud, hesitant at first, then more confidently. The sound was respectful, genuine, and filled with admiration. They were applauding not for showmanship or spectacle, but for skill, for dedication, for a performance that had transcended ordinary human achievement. The woman behind the Barrett allowed herself a small smile, subtle and controlled. It wasn't pride in the applause, but a quiet acknowledgement of a job executed well. She had carried herself with calm confidence, delivered perfection, and reminded everyone present of the heights a human being could achieve when discipline met talent. She lowered the Barrett, placing it carefully back in its case. The recoil, the weight, the magnitude of the task, it was all managed, all controlled, all executed flawlessly. Her presence had transformed the energy in the room, shifting disbelief to awe, skepticism to respect, mockery to reverence. And as the gallery continued to murmur, some standing, some leaning closer to witness one last glimpse of the world record holder, she allowed herself to quietly exit lane 12, moving with calm, measured steps. Each movement carried the same precision she had demonstrated with every shot, deliberate, controlled, unflinching. She left behind more than a perforated target or the echoes of gunfire. She left behind an impression, a lesson in discipline, focus, and mastery. Every person present, from seasoned shooters to wide-eyed teenagers, had been reminded that true skill commands attention, respect, and awe, even without words, even without fanfare. And though she walked away quietly, leaving the Barrett in its case, the gallery's silence was no longer awkward or uncertain. It was reverent, reflective, and full of admiration. They had laughed at her once. Now they understood. They had witnessed history. Her mastery, her calm, her discipline, and the small patch that signified her status had spoken louder than any words could. And the world, even in that small shooting range, had gone silent in respect. For her, it had never been about recognition. It had been about excellence, precision, discipline, mastery, and she had delivered it flawlessly. The Barrett rested, silent and obedient. The targets bore her mark. The gallery remained in awe, and the woman, quiet, focused, and supremely skilled, had once again reminded everyone present that greatness often comes in the most unassuming form.